The cameras were already rolling when the doors opened and Reba McEntire stepped onto the stage of The View with the poise of a woman who had conquered arenas, television, and an entire genre of music. The studio lights hit her fiery red hair, sending a shimmer across the set as the audience broke into thunderous applause. She wore that signature Oklahoma confidence like armor, her boots striking the floor in a rhythm that felt like its own entrance music. To the casual viewer, this looked like another feel-good daytime TV booking, a country legend promoting a new album while trading jokes with a panel of familiar faces. But anyone in that room could sense the current of energy pulsing beneath the polished surface. The anticipation that today wasn't going to be business as usual. The producers backstage, perched in the control room, leaned closer to their monitors. Like, before we move on, don't forget to hit subscribe button. They knew Reba wasn't someone who played small, and when Whoopi Goldberg shifted in her seat, ready to lob the first question, they braced for impact. Whoopi began with the kind of tone she often used when she wanted to needle a guest without sounding hostile. She asked Reba about her new record, complimented her staying power, then pivoted sharply into the kind of cultural critique that daytime television thrives on. "Do you think," Whoopi said, her voice calm but loaded, "that country music is still connecting with young people today? Or has it kind of been left behind while pop, hip-hop, and everything else have taken over?" The room seemed to tighten, the audience tilted forward in their chairs. Joy Behar scribbled something on her notepad as if she were preparing a joke to diffuse the tension. Reba, still smiling, adjusted her microphone, but anyone who knew her could see it in her eyes. That spark of defiance that had carried her through decades of doubters. She wasn't about to let her life's work be dismissed as a dusty relic of a fading era. Her voice rang out steady, not defensive but resolute, laced with the authority of someone who had fought for every ounce of respect she had earned. "Country music isn't about being trendy," she said. "It's about telling stories that touch people's lives. That doesn't go out of style, no matter what the charts say." Applause rippled across the audience. A few stood and cheered. Whoopi raised an eyebrow, unfazed, and leaned in again. "Sure," she countered, "but if it's that universal, why do so many young people see it as old-fashioned? Why does it feel like it only speaks to a certain crowd, a certain region, a certain, let's just say it, demographic?" The co-hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't going to be polite banter. This was a duel. Reba kept her posture relaxed, but her tone sharpened. "With all due respect, Whoopi, that's not true. I meet teenagers at my concerts who know every word of my songs. See families, 3 generations deep, singing along together. I've starred in sitcoms. On Broadway, I've mentored young artists on The Voice. If you think I'm irrelevant, you haven't been paying attention." The crowd erupted again, this time louder, and the camera caught Whoopi's lips tighten into the faintest smirk. She wasn't about to retreat. What followed wasn't scripted, wasn't planned, and wasn't what ABC wanted in its early afternoon time slot. Whoopi suggested that Reba's career longevity was admirable, but that clinging to tradition might eventually hold her back. "Every artist has to adapt," she said. "You can't just keep selling nostalgia." It was the kind of jab that could cut deep, and Reba's face, still composed, betrayed the flicker of someone who had heard this argument too many times before. She leaned forward, looked Whoopi square in the eye, and dropped a line that sent the room into chaos. "I don't just adapt, I set the standard, and maybe if you came to one of my shows, you'd see what real connection looks like." The audience gasped. Some cheered wildly. Joy Behar's attempt at a quick joke was drowned out completely. The cameras zoomed in, catching every ounce of tension. Backstage, producers argued furiously about whether to cut to commercial or ride the wave. Social media was already firing off reactions in real time. Clips were being clipped, hashtags were forming. Reba versus Whoopi, the queen of country versus the queen of daytime bluntness. 2 women too seasoned, too proud, and too iconic to yield an inch. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, measured, her expression unreadable, and then delivered the kind of line that can ignite a culture war. "No offense, Reba, but maybe it's time to pass the torch." For a heartbeat, the studio fell silent. Then came the roar, half the audience booing, half screaming in approval. Reba's cheeks flushed, but instead of shrinking, she rose to her feet, microphone still in hand, and with the steadiness of someone ready for battle, she declared, "If you think I'm done, you're not paying attention." The roar of the crowd shook the set. Co-hosts fidgeted, unsure whether to intervene or let the sparks keep flying. The producers knew they had lightning in a bottle, and maybe a disaster. That was the moment it shifted from a routine interview into a cultural showdown. Viewers at home could sense it. The audience in the studio could feel it. Reba wasn't just defending country music, she was defending her place in the American story. Whoopi wasn't just questioning relevance, she was challenging an icon to prove she still deserved the crown, and neither of them had any intention of backing down. The set of The View had never felt so electric. The moment Reba rose from her chair and fired back at Whoopi, the studio turned into a pressure cooker where every second of silence carried more weight than 1,000 scripted jokes. The deep audience, half in awe and half in disbelief, didn't know whether they were watching daytime TV or a prize fight. Joy Behar glanced nervously at the teleprompter, hoping for some pre-written lifeline, while Sarah Haynes fiddled with her cue cards like a nervous student. Alyssa Farah Griffin, usually quick to mediate, opened her mouth but closed it again, realizing nothing she said would matter in this storm. This wasn't a panel anymore, it was a battleground. Reba stayed on her feet, her presence filling the stage, and her voice carried like a seasoned performer who knew exactly how to work a room. She spoke not to Whoopi, not even to the panel, but to the audience, and through the cameras to millions watching at home. "I've spent my life telling stories," she said, each word steady, each syllable sharp as a knife. Stories about heartache, about love, about grit. You don't need to be from Oklahoma to understand them. You just need to be human. The applause thundered again, and you could see the conviction radiating off her like heat. Whoopi, though, wasn't rattled. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, the smirk never leaving her face. Her counterpunch was subtle but deliberate. "And yet," she said slowly, letting the silence stretch between each word, "the music industry is about evolution. It's about what's next. If all you're doing is holding on to what you had, eventually people move on." Gasps rippled through the studio. To some, it sounded like tough love. To others, it was pure disrespect aimed at a woman whose career had outlasted almost every trend in the book. Reba inhaled deeply, her jaw tightening just enough for the cameras to catch. But instead of snapping, she doubled down with the precision of a veteran fighter. "I'm not holding on to the past," she shot back. "I've lived through the past, survived it, and I'm still standing here, stronger than ever. You don't build a 40-year career by clinging. You build it by working harder, by adapting, and by refusing to let anyone tell you you're finished." The crowd went wild again, stomping and cheering like they were at a concert, not a TV taping. It was the kind of live confrontation that producers both dread and secretly crave. Ratings gold, but also a PR nightmare. From the control room, frantic voices debated cutting to commercial. "We're losing control of the segment," one muttered. "No, we're making history." Another shot back. Whoopi, sensing she was losing the audience, tried to take the higher ground. "I respect you, Reba. I respect what you've done, but respect doesn't mean we can't ask hard questions. Maybe the reason this feels heated is because deep down, you know there's some truth to what I'm saying. It was a calculated move. Twist the knife, but keep the tone calm, almost maternal." The crowd groaned audibly, and even Joy, usually one to back Whoopi, looked uncomfortable. Reba didn't flinch. She lowered her voice, almost whispering, which only made the audience lean in closer. "You think I'm threatened by a question? I've had tougher critics than you. I've had people tell me a small-town girl with a twang would never sell out Madison Square Garden. I've had people laugh when I tried television. I've had doors slammed in my face when I took on Broadway. And guess what? I walked through anyway." The audience exploded into applause, some people on their feet. Whoopi's smirk faltered just for a second, but it was caught on camera. The tension was unbearable. The co-hosts tried once again to steer the show back on track. Joy cracked a joke about how she thought she was going to spend the morning talking about pumpkin spice season, but her punchline was swallowed by the crowd still buzzing from Reba's words. Alyssa piped up with a diplomatic, "I think both of you are making valid points," but she was ignored entirely. The spotlight stayed on the two titans, locked in a standoff neither was willing to lose. Then Whoopi dropped the line that made every jaw in the room tighten. "Look, Reba, no one's saying you're not talented, but sometimes knowing when to step aside is just as important as knowing how to stay." It wasn't shouted, it wasn't cruel, it was delivered with the calmness of someone who believed she had just dropped the truth bomb of the day. But for Reba, it was the ultimate insult. Her face flushed, her smile disappeared, and she leaned back into the mic with the kind of force that reminded everyone why she had lasted decades in an industry that chews people up and spits them out. "If standing up for my art, for my fans, and for myself makes me stubborn, then I'll wear stubborn like a crown," she said. The audience erupted in cheers so loud the sound team struggled to keep levels from peaking. Whoopi, visibly irritated now, leaned back, her arms crossed. The cameras captured it all. The grin of defiance on Reba's face, the steely glare in Whoopi's eyes, and the stunned expressions of co-hosts caught between two forces of nature. Backstage, whispers started. Crew members traded nervous glances. Was this about to implode live on national television? One assistant producer muttered, "She's gone too far. A BC won't like this." Another countered, "This is why people watch." Nobody remembers the polite interviews. The network executives who were tuned in from their offices were already firing off emails. Should they intervene? Should they let it ride? Every second ticked like dynamite closer to an explosion. When the segment finally cut to commercial, the audience still roared. The co-hosts exhaled in unison like divers breaking the surface. But the damage, or maybe the magic, was already done. Whoopi had poked the bear, Reba had bared her teeth, and America was already picking sides. The cut to commercial was supposed to cool things down, but the studio was still, humming like a live wire about to snap. The audience wouldn't sit still. Some were still clapping, others were booing. A few were chanting Reba's name like they were in a stadium instead of a TV studio. Security guards positioned at the side stage whispered into their earpieces, unsure if they were preparing for a celebrity walkout or an encore performance. The co-hosts leaned back in their chairs, whispering among themselves, trying to figure out whether they had just witnessed a career-defining moment or a complete meltdown. But the real drama wasn't on stage anymore. It was happening behind the cameras. Backstage, the producers were at war. Half of them wanted to rein Reba in, remind her she was a guest on their show, not the headliner at a sold-out arena. The other half were practically giddy, already imagining the ratings spike, the trending hashtags, the endless cycle of clips that would replay on entertainment shows for weeks. "This is viral gold," one muttered, clutching her headset. "She's out of control," another snapped. "If we let this keep going, we'll look like we're instigating it." The executive producer, pale and sweating, slammed his hands on the console and shouted, "She's either going to finish this segment or she's off my set." Meanwhile, Reba wasn't finished. She had walked off the stage briefly during the break, microphone still clipped to her dress, and stood in a corner with her arms crossed, her team hovering nervously around her. "You want me to play nice?" she asked one of them, her voice low but brimming with fire. "I didn't come here to be disrespected on national television. I came here to talk about my work. If she wants to drag me, then I'll drag right back." Her manager whispered something about optics, about staying calm, about how daytime TV wasn't the place for open warfare. Reba just shook her head. Optics don't fill arenas. Integrity does. On the studio floor, Whoopi sat cool and collected, sipping her tea as if nothing had happened. But those who knew her could see it. The slight tightening of her jaw, the way her eyes narrowed when she looked at the crew huddled in the shadows. Whoopi wasn't used to being challenged like this on her own turf. She'd made a career out of being the one who threw the punches, not the one forced to defend herself. Still, she wasn't about to let Reba walk away with the win, not on her stage. When the show returned from commercial, the energy in the room was strange, half excited, half tense, like everyone was waiting to see if someone would throw a chair. Sonny Hostin tried to steer things back to safer waters, throwing out a generic question about Reba's songwriting process, but the audience barely listened. They wanted blood, they wanted more of the showdown, and Whoopi, never one to disappoint, gave them exactly what they wanted. "You know, Reba," she said casually, "a lot of artists, when they reach a certain level, they realize it's not always about holding on to relevance. Sometimes it's about making space for the next generation." It was the same point she had made before, but now it felt sharper, like a blade pressed just a little harder against the skin. The crowd booed. Others cheered. Reba didn't even blink. She leaned into her mic, her voice cutting through the noise like a church bell on a Sunday morning. "I've been making space for new voices my whole career. But don't mistake generosity for weakness. I don't have to step aside for anyone. I'll move when I'm good and ready, not when someone else tells me to." The audience leapt to their feet, clapping so hard the applause sign above the set was pointless. Joy Behar tried once again to lighten the mood with a joke about handing Reba and Whoopi boxing gloves, but even she couldn't hide the nervous edge in her voice. Sarah Haynes gave up trying to redirect and just sat back, letting history unfold in front of her. By the time the next break hit, the producers had made their decision. A floor manager hurried over to Reba's team and whispered firmly, "We're wrapping her segment." After this, "She's done." The words were diplomatic, but the meaning was clear. Whether she had walked into the lion's den or turned the whole set into her own stage, her time on The View was finished. Her publicist frowned, but Reba just nodded, her lips curling into the faintest of smiles. "Figures," she muttered. "They can't handle the heat." Word spread through the studio audience faster than wildfire. Whispers turned into chatter, chatter into rumors. "They're cutting her off," someone hissed. "They're kicking her out," shouted another. By the time the co-hosts were back on camera without Reba, the narrative had already written itself. To viewers at home, it looked like she had vanished. To those in the room, it felt like she had been pushed. And to the internet, which wastes no time in spinning its own version of events, it was already a scandal. Others sided with Whoopi, praising her for daring to ask the uncomfortable questions no one else would. Memes flooded feeds. Reba was photoshopped into gladiator armor. Whoopi was cast as a referee in a boxing ring. Back at ABC headquarters, executives weren't laughing. What played like good television to the audience looked like a potential PR bomb to the network. Emails flew, conference calls buzzed, and lawyers were already asking questions about what exactly had been said on air. Had anyone crossed a legal line? Had anyone violated contracts? One executive muttered darkly, "If this backfires, we'll have to issue an apology to somebody, and I don't know who." But if Reba was worried, she didn't show it. After being quietly escorted off set, she walked past the cameras with her head high, thanking the crew members by name, and even flashing a smile at a few stunned audience members. "Don't worry, y'all," she said as she passed. "This isn't the end of anything." And with that, she was gone, leaving behind a stage that felt more like a crime scene than a talk show set. If you like this video, then subscribe.